Welcome, everyone. As you know, I'm Sister Michelle, and our guest speaker for today is someone who you've already met once before. But her skills are so wide and so deep that we said, let's invite her for another aspect for our theme for the month of April. And it's about social justice today. How is social justice, which has been around since the gospel time with Jesus, how has that changed for today? And what is the call that we need to listen to for today? So, the topic is social justice today, inclusivity. So, Justine has some expertise in that area that she would like to share with us today. So, welcome, Justine. Thank you. So glad that you're here.
Thanks, Sister Michelle. It's good to be back. And hopefully, the topic of accountability has been engaging and you've reflected on it. And I think there's something here too. The themes are connected to me about how we hold community and who's part of our community. So this feels kind of like part two.
Part two. Yeah.
So good to be with everyone. Um, and I'm going to share my screen again, and the slides will look similar. I very much like branding. I'm sure our communication department would be pleased with that as well.
Oh, they
But
would be delighted.
yeah, so I'm going to share my screen. And Sister Michelle, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see the slide?
I'll tell you, I can see it now,
Okay, perfect.
and everybody else.
Yeah,
Okay.
some presenters can just start going and wait, I don't see the slides or it's not correct. So
Yes,
thank you.
you're good.
So I think one of the reasons I was asked to talk on this today is because inclusion is part of my title here at the center at Donaldson. So I serve the sisters, the coworkers, residents, and community talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're all very vital parts of our world today, but we're going to dive in deeper to inclusivity and where that meets our call of the cry of the poor, of the cry of the earth. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we meet the stranger as well. Um, so I like to conceptualize inclusivity as building a bigger table rather than building a wall, which we've heard in some political contexts, not just in the United States, um, but that might activate something. Oh, like I've heard that phrase before. But really, that's all we're doing when we invite a conversation about inclusion. Uh, and that looks different per context, per region, per time. So my conversation in 2024 would look very different than when we're talking about the Civil Rights Act in 1964. So there's some common themes, but it also looks a little bit different depending on where you are and who you're with. But if we can say inclusion is about creating an environment where everyone's thoughts, experiences, and ideas matter. To me, that is the most accessible and simple definition. And I think that's something the poor handmaids of Jesus Christ already do very well. Just like accountability, it is a practice, though, that we need to be mindful of. And it's pulling up chairs, it's adding a couple more tables to create more space because we know everyone, every life is valued. So that means every thought, experience, and a person matters. So what that could look like for us is asking who is and who isn't at the table. Uh, I do this work again with sisters and coworkers. And when we have a committee meeting, we take a moment to look around the table and we ask what voices are missing. Did we get everyone or near everyone? Can't do it all, right? But to be represented in some way. And that allows us to be in creative partnership or collaboration. It's not just who we look like or think like, and then we work with because it's easy, but creative collaboration calls us to say, I've never thought of that before. or let's try this because that is not my lived experience. And then two critical components of inclusion. This is kind of where an idiom would be where the rubber meets the road, where we really get called to task, which is responding to conflict and having a brave space for disagreement. So with various lived experiences and including them at the table, conflict is going to arise. Uh, Many people are conflicted first. If that is your current state, I want you to invite yourself to be like, why? Why? Um, a lot of us are told to not, lean into conflict, to be a people pleaser or oblige people. Uh, but conflict actually creates collaboration. It creates a greater understanding. I'm not always looking for conflict, but there is something about transformation that can happen to build a brave space. And then just like accountability, inclusion is about making sure, like preventing bias, harassment, and exclusion, but then also repairing the harm that is done because of it. One more note here, I wanted to also add what I consider belonging. So to me, that's another step into inclusion, not only just having people at the table, but really feeling like they can show up as their true self in whatever that may look like. So feeling fully engaged, not just, oh, I have to go to this meeting and I have to say what they want. Um, Remember, my context is work, so I'll be talking about kind of meeting context, but feeling fully engaged to be able to share your opinions and voice your disagreements and know that regardless of who you are still loved here. So my questions about that for reflection, and I'm just going to take a moment for you to sit with, because I think we know the definition of inclusion, but sometimes we need to feel it in our hearts. So in what ways have you experienced exclusion?
Mhm.
Think of that time. I think we all have that. And I would love to hear if you haven't, like, wow, awesome. Um, and how does being excluded make you feel? So sometimes we hear negative emotions with this, like, it doesn't feel good to not feel like you belong. And then the second question, in what ways have you experienced inclusion? What ways have you been fully welcomed into the table? And how does that make you feel? Hopefully, you're feeling some warmth in your heart. You have a smile on your face if you're recalling a memory. Just take a moment to sit with one or both of these questions, and then I'll invite us back. Right. So if it worked for you that, hey, I do remember a time of exclusion, it didn't feel good, good. I do remember a time of inclusion and it felt good. We're going to hold on to that goodness and how to ensure in our work, in our call, that we can do that for others. And I think that's especially difficult in 2024 in a world that's hard. We talk about climate change. We talk about violence in many countries. Uh, it's kind of hard to be right now. Um, and so today we do things to protect ourselves or protect our own communities. It's very human. It's very natural. We're quick to put up those barriers for safety and for comfort. And when I say we here, I mean the collective humanity. I think it is very human of us to go to me, my family, my sisters, my community, um, even though we serve others. There's kind of something that you fall back on. And societally, we do this in a us versus them mentality. If someone gets resources from the government, other people don't. If one person gets our volunteer services, another group is excluded. Sometimes not intentionally, but we know that creates a divide. And then it kind of feels like us versus them or us and the other. And so to other someone is really treating someone as they are not part of the group. So it is mostly unconscious bias that we do this. We don't actively go out and say, no, you can't be here. Um, but it is really to other someone is to push them aside, to treat them as a stranger, even though our call is to invite them in as a neighbor. And another prompt, it's all questions today. How can we, in our mission, center those who have historically been and presently are othered? So that might look different per province or per mission, per day. It might feel unique. But we know historically, right, there's a long history in each country of who's been historically oppressed or marginalized or excluded. So just take a moment if you can come up with some groups. And then the real work is how to center them then. The most marginalized, right? That's some of our language we use. The most impoverished. How do we center them in our mission so they can become our neighbor? I pulled one quote. You all, again, can share a lot about opening your heart and a lot about radical hospitality, but I just pulled one one point out that I really appreciated. And I'll read it now. St. Francis expressed the essence of a fraternal openness that allows us to acknowledge, appreciate, and love each person, regardless of physical proximity, regardless of where he or she was born, or how she or he lives. Really, that true and faithful openness to the other, or to the stranger, or to the person who is not yet our neighbor. I think this image there, if you Google inclusivity, you're going to find a ton of images. I think Sister Michelle has memorized, if you can do that for an image, right? There's 3 sections where we talk about equality, equity, inclusion, belonging, access. You can find many that do this. But this one really spoke to me of humans creating their own boxes of separating people and Jesus erasing them. Right. Again, a very human thing to do. And the call to us is to say no, break down those barriers, include, open your hearts. And then 2 more quotes that again resonate with me by Father James Martin, a Jesuit. It is impossible to experience a person's life or to be compassionate if you do not listen to the person or if you do not ask questions. Again, so that who's at the table? Okay, but they're at the table, but is their voice being heard? Are they being seen? Are they being valued? Have we created space? And then President Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
this quote has sat with me for a long time and really challenges me. I don't like this man. Let's say in 2024, I don't like this person. I must get to know them better. So to me, that's inclusion. Like, okay, what do I think or what do I project on this person that is creating them from a distance, keeping them at a distance? And how do I do the work to break down, right? Erase that barrier. I can reflect and pray and meditate on this quote for a long time. But let's go on about what that actually means. Hopefully I can work through this slide slowly because just like accountability, this isn't one presentation. This isn't kind of 2 presentations. This is a practice that is truly part of our work. And I think we talked about we've already mentioned hospitality. I used to work at a retreat center And we call it radically, we are radically opened. And to me, in this world now, I think just offering decency and respect and our core values is radical hospitality. And it really does start with us and our work, really extending that out. I also, there's a little note here about radical hospitality being extended to yourself too. So this work calls us into grace of ourselves and others. I think oftentimes people come to hear the term inclusion and they feel like they're going to mess up. They feel like, oh, I have to talk about inclusion because I was exclusive once and I didn't even know. And that's really not the task. That has negative feelings associated with it. And when I want you to think about inclusion, I want you to feel warmth and hospitality and grace, all of that good stuff, because this is the good work that you are doing. So take a moment to reflect on your own beliefs and values. If you can write them down at some point in, again, your prayerful reflection, uh, if you say family as a value, like family is priority to me, my faith is a belief system that is central to me. Who does that include? And how do you know that? So those additional questions. And are they in alignment with community, openness to the spirit, and, with other values that are so central to your life? I also always encourage practicing courage and vulnerability. Uh, to be inclusive is to unlearn some things that we have learned as humans in our school systems, in our communities. And it takes courage to acknowledge that, to unlearn something, then learn something new. Often takes more time because there's some deep stuff you have to do in your own heart and soul. And then vulnerability, to be open to making mistakes. Many of my presentations, I ask for 10% more vulnerability and courage than you normally give. You don't have to tell me your deepest secrets, right? But I want you to be invited to be brave with a courageous heart, right? Uh, and then here's our loop back to last time I was with you, is accept responsibility for harm. We are messy in our work towards inclusion. I don't always get it right. Sometimes I forget people who should be at the table. And so I need to accept responsibility for that. But I also, in that work, trust my peers to hold me accountable. So in your community, how do you hold yourselves accountable to be inclusive, especially if it may make you uncomfortable? So again, when we were talking about lean into that curiosity, why does this make me uncomfortable? Because we're constantly continuing to learn and grow. I probably would have lots of money if I started saving $1 per every time I said that. This work is never done.
Yeah.
This work is never done, which is pretty beautiful. It's not a check mark. Hey, I'm now the most inclusive community or person or province. We're never going to get there because there's always a learning growth curve. And I think that learning really happens internally first. I said that in the last slide. So these questions, before I leave you with one more quote, and Sister Michelle gave me this invitation to ask, so thank you, is in what ways have Jesus and St. Katerina Kasper exemplified gospel hospitality to others? Because if you sub out gospel hospitality, we're talking about inclusion. We're talking about building a bigger table. We're talking about inviting people to feel like they fully belong. And the asterisk there is even when we might not agree with them, there's that brave and courageous work. And then who are strangers that have yet to be your neighbor? Which I think is a bit more poetic way to ask you, what is your call to inclusion? So if what is your call to inclusion sounds a little bit more logical or you're kind of a process person, please play with that. But who are the strangers that have yet to be your neighbor? And finally, I will leave you with Valerie Kaur, who wrote a memoir called Revolutionary Love, which is just a beautiful book. And I like this too, because I think if you take out gospel hospitality or inclusion, we're talking about love, right? There's a lot of synonyms here. But she writes, love calls us to look upon the faces of those different from us as brothers and sisters. That feels familiar, doesn't it? That language. Love calls us to weep when their bodies are outcast, broken, and destroyed. Love calls us to speak even when our voice trembles, stand even when hate spins out of control, and stay even when the blood is fresh on the ground. Love makes us brave.
Mhm.
And I see that as a central theme in those reflection questions, right? How do we love our neighbors? How do we love strangers who have yet to be our neighbors? How did Jesus love people and the earth and all of the creatures? That love was inclusion when other people would not include them. And we can look now in 2024 and still see some of those same challenges and are called to invite that in. Uh, so we have great work to do, and love and inclusion is part of that radical hospitality to invite people in and to invite our own growth. Uh, so hopefully this was a bit of a teaser. Lots of questions I gave you this time to think on, but it is really that work of asking ourselves our own questions about our values, beliefs around inclusion, love, and radical hospitality. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing and come back to Sister Michelle.
And thank you. You know, you ask questions in this presentation that really prompt us to stop and to think about that. So, for all the sisters, the whole idea of using those questions, either going back and watching this again and stopping at those times and really reflect on those questions and saying, what is that call? How is that call to love? Stretching me further, helping me to grow and causing me growth in my own life. When we when we stand in a position of criticism, it's it's taking a perspective that, well, maybe you don't belong at our table. So we have to kind of keep that in mind, and it's just part of being human, because this is earth, it's not heaven. We're just plain human, and we fail. And so, thank you, Justine. I think that call to periodically reflect on, these are the questions we need to ask and to see, are we keeping people at the table, or do we shun, or do we stand off from certain people? And or do we really, as it says, want you to be brave, and courageous? And there's a song, I just want you to be brave, and go something like that. But that whole idea that when we see somebody off by themselves, we are brave and we go invite, and we invite them into our circle. So thank you, Justine. You have given us basic human questions for us to grapple with. And we grow because of these basic human questions. So thank you. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I so appreciate it. And that concludes our session today on social justice today and inclusivity. Thank you, Justine.